This is part 3 of the North and will be broken into 2 parts, Kings of the Winter Part 1 and Kings of the Winter Part 2. I know, lots of parts, but I'm trying to keep these videos from getting crazy long. Part 1 covers the Starks' conquest of the North and pre-Andal invasion, Part 2 covers Andal invasion, their issues in holding their territory, expansion, and the ends of the Kings of Winter. I also want to throw a major disclaimer in here. This is a general telling of the Starks' conquest of the North. Because there aren't a lot of dates to go off of, a book could come out next year, please George R. R. Martin, that could place one event in front of the other or after the Andal invasion. From my research, everything in this video most likely happened pre the Andals, but even when researching for this video, there were dates that contradicted each other by thousands of years. So take this video as these are the events of conquering the North and not a definitive timeline. Short recap, the First Men came to Westeros, at some point settled in the North where the first king of the First Men may have ruled from. The First Men and children then duked it out, a pact is signed where the First Men take most of the lands of Westeros save the Deep Forest, making it so they can spread out. The war between the First Men and the children ending led to the Age of Heroes. Eventually the Long Night came, the last hero, perhaps from the North, found the children and together with the Night's Watch turned back the others. And then after the Long Night ended, Bran the Builder built the wall and Winterfell, where he supposedly began the line of House Stark, known as the Kings of Winter. This video we're talking about these Kings of Winter. After Brandon the Builder built Winterfell, it became the seat of House Stark, and eventually the Starks would rule the lands beyond the Neck for 8,000 years as the Kings of Winter. These kings were hard men in hard times. Songs are sung about how these Stark kings drove the giants from the north, you know, the guys that helped build the wall, and how another King of Winter killed a skin changer named Gavin Greywolf and his kin in the savage War of the Wolves. Despite these great feats, House Stark's rule wasn't uncontested. There are plenty of wars where House Stark expanded their domain or had to win back lands taken by rebels. And if you remember, the Barrow Kings claim they were descended from the first king that ruled over all the First Men and had originally led them to Westeros. The Barrow Kings claim they still had supremacy over all the First Men everywhere, including the Starks. They were not too happy that the Starks were trying to claim dominion over all the North and, quote, their people. The wars between the Barrow Kings and the Kings of Winter would last for 200 years, even though runic records title it the Thousand Years' War. The wars would conclude when the last Barrow King bent the knee to the King of Winter and gave his daughter to the Stark King to marry. From there on out, House Dustin would rule the Barrowlands for the Starks. Though this was a sizable victory, it didn't grant the Starks control of the entire North due to the dozens of petty kings ruling over small and large realms throughout the North. It would take 1,000 years and so many more wars that resulted in the extinction of many houses and lines for the Starks to claim control of the entire area. And while conquering these areas, the Starks still had to be mindful of the wildlings attacking in the north, the Ironborn reaving in the west, and the slavers/raiders on the east coast. During this time, here are some of the houses that were reduced from royals to vassals of the Starks. Flints of Breakstone Hill, the Slates of Blackpool, the Umbers of Last Hearth, the Locks of Old Castle, the Glovers of Deep Moat, the Fishers of the Stony Shore, the Riders of the Rills, and maybe the Blackwoods of Raventree, who may have ruled most of the Wolf's Wood before the Starks drove them from their lands. Unfortunately, as stated before, not all houses were reduced to vassals. Some were wiped out. In the war for Sea Dragon Point, the Starks beat the Warg King and their allies, the Children of the Forest. When they were beat, the Starks killed all the Warg King's sons, beasts, and greenseers, and took his daughters as prizes. The Starks really like taking daughters as prizes. House Amber, House Frost, House Towers, and House Greenwood met similar ends. As the Starks claimed more and more territory and brought more houses under them, the title King of the Winter became less frequent, and they began to use the title King in the North as a way to claim control over the entire region. While conquering the lands of the North, the Starks also had to focus on keeping their land. King John Stark built the Wolf's Den at the mouth of the White Knife to protect against raiders and slavers from across the Narrow Sea. Some maesters believe these raiders and slavers were actually early Andal invasions, or the ancestors of men of Ib, or maybe slavers from Volantis. The Wolf's Den built at the mouth of the White Knife was held for centuries by different houses, including the Grey Starks, an offshoot house of the Starks that controlled it for almost 5 centuries, and then after them the Flints for a century, Locks for almost 2 centuries, along with the Slates, Longs, Holts, and Ashwoods. This would be a vulnerable point for House Stark over the centuries. Reavers from the Three Sisters once took the castle, and when a King of Winter, Edric Stark, became too feeble to fully control his realm, slavers from the Stepstones would take control of the Wolf's Den. These slavers would brand their captives with hot irons and break them before shipping them across the sea. Edric Stark's great-grandson, Brandon Stark, would take the Wolf's Den back from these slavers. The Wolf's Den would have further problems with Andal invasion, which we'll talk about next week. The Starks also added territory that wasn't necessarily considered a part of the northern region at the time. Moat Cailin in the Neck, where the Children of the Forest had attempted to shatter the Neck, was controlled by the Marsh Kings and their Crannog men. These Marsh Kings held Moat Cailin and turned back any attacks from the south. The Marsh Kings would even ally with the Barrow Kings, Red Kings, or Boltons, and Kings of the Winter against southern attackers. Eventually, the exact time is unknown, King Rickard Stark would defeat the last of the Marsh Kings, marry his daughter, and bring the Neck under the realm of Winterfell, and give it to House Reed to rule, which was a huge win for House Stark in terms of defense. Moat Cailin is said to be such a strong defensive wall that the Kings of Winter could stand at Moat Cailin and throw back hosts 10 times the size of their own. No southern army in history has ever passed through Moat Cailin. At one point during the Starks' conquest of the North, which still wasn't complete at this point and a little iffy where they're at in the conquest at this point, they had another problem that drew their attention: the Night's King. The Night's King will be covered more in depth in another video, but basically the Night's King was the 13th commander of the Night's Watch that came into his position during the Age of Heroes, and shortly after the wall was constructed. The 13th Lord Commander broke his vows, declared himself the Night's King, and used the men of the Night's Watch to rise in rebellion. For 13 years, this Lord Commander ruled as the Night's King until the Starks allied with Joramun, the first king beyond the wall, and together they defeated the Night's King and restored the Watch. After the Night's King's defeat, his name would be forbidden and forgotten from history. This event also most likely led to the Night's Watch not being allowed to build walls at their keeps, so that the wall and the castles would always be accessible from the south. This event is also still remembered a bit bitterly by the Wildlings, who say they helped the Stark King only to be thanked and kicked back across the wall. The North would always have to be vigilant against Wildling attacks. With the Night's King taken care of, the Starks would go back to their conquest of the North and bringing houses under their control. But in all this fighting to control the North, you may have noticed we haven't talked about the Starks' bitterest foe yet, the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, House Bolton. The Boltons would be one of the last houses the Starks fought against to control the North. House Bolton's old territory stretched from the Last River to the White Knife, and as far south as the Sheep's Head Hills. The hatred between the two houses goes back as far as the Long Night, and the wars between the families are numerous. In one war, King Royce Bolton, second of his name, is said to have taken and burned Winterfell, and that a descendant of King Royce Bolton, King Royce Bolton IV, did the same 3 centuries later. Despite any victories the Boltons may have had, eventually even their house fell to Winterfell and the Starks. The last Red King, Rogar the Huntsman, swore loyalty to House Stark as the first Andals crossed the Narrow Sea some 6,000 to 8,000 years before a modern A Song of Ice and Fire time. With their loyalty to House Stark, the Boltons agreed to give up their flaying ways. Whether they honored that is iffy. However, even with the Boltons conceding to the Starks, it wouldn't be the last of the fights between the two houses. House Bolton would continue to rebel against the Starks throughout time. After the defeat of the Boltons, the last of the Starks' northern rivals, the North would face the greatest threat to their kingdom: the coming of the Andals and the end of the Age of Heroes. Well, when most of us think the Age of Heroes ended. You can fight and debate about when this age actually ended. Next Sunday, we're going to talk about the Starks during and after the Andal invasion and the end of the Kings of Winter. If you attended George R. Martin's event or heard about it, you know George confirmed that there are dinosaurs in the A Song of Ice and Fire world. There were already hints at this, but with the confirmation from George, I declare this day a win for Channel Rawrist. He also stated that he wasn't perfectly happy with the TV show, which isn't a shocker. Also, there is no system to magic, and he wants us to know that not every detail is a clue, and that they are just words, and most our theories are wrong. Sad day for the tinfoil people. But we still have our dinosaurs. New giveaway starts this week. All you have to do is leave a comment in any video published between August 30th and September 5th. Then a random winner will be picked next week. New Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire videos every Sunday and Wednesday. Prepare yourself for Tinfoil City this Wednesday with a Bran the Builder theory video.